Welcome everybody to Sewing Thursday with T. I'm of course T of Sewing by T, my sewing blog, and Simply by T, my fabric shop. And I'm a seamstress with 20 years of self-taught experience, and I'm prepared to share as much of that as I can with you in 15 minutes. So while we're talking about sharing, please don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. I'll pause here just for a second to make sure that you get a chance to hit share and like. That helps boost our viewability to other people. Oh, well, I'm waiting for more people to arrive. Today I've got on a Hala Slim Dolman, and this is the Niagara double brush poly from the shop, and this is the Ivory Floral double brush poly. I have a blog post over on Sewing by T if you're really interested in the pattern. So today we're going to be talking about knits, but before we do that, as I've been working on this series and thinking about things, I've been looking at my sewing room a little bit differently. And so I noticed something really important. Hi, Melissa! I am happy you are here. I'm going to talk about something that seems kind of silly, but I'm going to talk about sewing pins. So this is your typical sewing pin. Maybe you can see it there. They're not very long. They're about an inch long. And I actually hate these pins because they're so tiny and they're hard to use. So I wanted to tell you about this other pin that I use. So regular pins are about an inch long. This is, let's see if I can find a way to show it to you. Maybe it shows better against me. Not really. So anyway, this is a 1 3/8 inch straight pin, and the brand is Dritz, and it's called, oh, hold on. I have it right here. It is an extra fine glass head pin. So I like these a lot. They're a lot easier to pin with, and you can also hang them off the edge of your seam allowance a little bit, makes them easier to pop back out. So that's my little bit of sewing advice is if it's time for you to buy new pins, pick up a pack of these. They are $10 for 250 pins over on Joann's, which, as you already know, unless you've got an amazing coupon, don't buy from Joann's. Wallwack has 250 of them for $5.29 on sale right now. So if you are looking to purchase pins, that's a good product to grab. So we are talking about knit fabric. And what a lot of people don't know is knit fabric is just fabric knit on a machine. So this is my little knit swatch here. I made this week specifically for this class. Because if you understand that knit jersey, oh, hi Bjork. So as I was saying, if you understand that knit jersey is just a piece of knitted fabric, then the tips I'm about to tell you is going to make a lot of sense. So this is a piece of knit, and I use a really big gauge yarn. So if you look here, make sure you can see it. You can see all these fabulous little V shapes, right? This is called the knit side, those little V shapes. And this, let's see, make sure you can see that really well. This is the purl side, and you see all those lines that run across. So why is that important? 2 reasons. One, you need to make sure that when you're sewing, your fabric has all the knit sides out or all the purl sides out, whichever you prefer. Hi, Daisy. Thank you for joining me. So as I was saying, fabric. Unless you're going for something very specific of a look, you want to make sure that either all your knit side is out or all your purl side is out. How do we make that happen? So with French terry, it's pretty easy. You've got your knit side. Oh, you can't see it on this side, but on, oh, hi Natasha, hi Maggie. So as I was saying, on French terry, you have a loopy side and you have a flat side. Either side can be your right side depending on what you're working on, but it's easy to tell on French terry which side's the right side, which side's the wrong side. It is not so easy if you're looking at a piece of cotton lycra because they look the same on both sides, unless you were to get a really good magnifying glass, and then you would see that there is a knit side, and a purl side. So this piece here can actually give us a lot of information. You'll notice that the fabric along the top and on the bottom rolls to the knit side. And you'll notice on this piece of fabric, the top and bottom, especially if you pull them, will roll to the knit side. So that will make sure that you're always using the knit side. Now on your selvage edge, just like on this selvage edge, you'll notice that it's rolling to the back. On this selvage edge, whoop, it rolls to the back. So when you're looking, yes. So Melissa, here's the trick. You don't have to cut during daylight, so you can use a magnifying glass and find the knit side and the purl side. You can just look at which way the fabric is rolling. So on the selvage edge, it's going to roll to the back. Hi, Janet. And on the horizontal or stretch lines, you're going to have it rolling to the front. So if you always look for that, you will always get your fabric set up right. Now, one of the things that I have noticed, people really don't pay a lot of attention to grain lines on fabric, or grain lines on knit fabric. And I hear people saying, oh, well, I can get an extra large pair of leggings on 1 yard of fabric. I can guarantee they are not setting their fabric up in line with the grain. What will that do? So if you don't line things up with the grain, you can get pants legs that twist, sleeves that twist, neck bands that seem to try to roll and do funny things. So it's really important that you cut with the grain. And that is why I made this nice big swatch sample. The grain on this is actually perfectly lined up with one row of little V's. It's hard to do this because the camera is showing me the opposite of what I'm doing. So if you see those little V's, that is actually your grain line. When you are sewing with knits, it's not that important that you match up your selvage edges. It is way more important that you try to get close to matching up those V's. Now, this is not easy. However, you don't have to be perfect because there is a little bit of leeway there. But when you're lining things up, you're going to want to look for those little V's. And the other thing is that if you line it up perfectly, it is going to want to line up perfectly as you run it down the edge. Now, that tip about it rolling applies to all knitted fabrics. They will always roll to the front along the stretch, and the selvage edge is going to roll to the back. All right, let me take a look at my notes over here. And we talked about that. All right, so when you're setting up your fabric, you know, I was talking about grain line, and I have made garments turning the fabric the other way, mostly because I was running short of fabric and I didn't want to have to wait and either wash more fabric or wait to go to the store. If you are going to use the opposite grain line for one pattern piece, you're going to want to use the opposite grain for all of the pattern pieces because there's going, oh, hi Karen, I'm glad you made it this time. We are talking about exactly what you asked me about last week, which is how do you tell the front side from the back side? So I'm glad you joined us because I'm actually going to repeat that for you because I know I sent you photos, but I think if you see it, it makes a lot of sense. So this is a piece of cotton lycra. Here is the selvage edge. Here's your top edge. So you're going to notice that this fabric is rolling towards the front, and this is the knit side. The selvage edge will always roll towards the back side. So when you're looking at your fabric, if you don't want to grab a magnifying glass and try to like figure out where's the V's, you can look at how the fabric is rolling, and that will tell you which side is the front. Right, so back to what I was saying. If you're going to be cutting the opposite, like perpendicular to the grain, you're going to want to cut all your pieces because when people look at that garment, they will notice that something is off. they probably won't be able to tell you what it is, but something will feel wrong about the garment. And I've actually made things for my kids and I wasn't paying attention and I was sewing late at night and I cut things opposite. And when I saw it on them during the day, I had to take it away because I was like, this is driving me crazy. I see these lines all over the place and nothing's working. So definitely pay attention to your grain line and make sure that whichever side you decide is your front side, because you can use the knit side or the purl side. There's no rules on that. Whichever side you decide is your front, make sure that they are all cut with the same front. All right, so I actually want to that's exactly right, Melissa. The light is going to hit the fibers different and things are going to be off. I find this is especially important when you're color blocking. You can use it as a feature of your color blocking to cut it the opposite way because that's going to draw light differently. But I personally find it distracting, and that might just be me being a little bit obsessive about the way things line up. All right, so that's all I have for today as far as things that I wanted to talk about. I want to thank you for joining me. If you have questions, you brought questions for me, go ahead and start posting those. I had a couple questions sent to me. One of those was Karen, which is why I dedicated this whole class to. As anybody's putting up those questions, if you find these videos helpful, don't forget to like and share. The more that you like and share, the more other people are going to get to see this stuff. All right, so the question I received was, when can you use a straight stitch on a knit garment? And that can be, okay, so Janet, I'll go ahead and answer your question first. The pattern has an arrow on it to line up. You need to, usually that arrow says either it's with the grain line or the greatest stretch, and it should be labeled either the grain line or the greatest stretch. If it says grain line, you're going to want to match it up with the selvage edge so the arrow would go up and down. If it says greatest stretch, it needs to go side to side. I don't like patterns that tell me to match up with the greatest stretch because then I have to draw a perpendicular line to match it up vertically. Those can be a little bit harder to line up on a knit fabric. All right, so back to when can you use a straight stitch on a knit garment? The question was specifically about top stitching. Okay, so if you have a big swingy skirt made out of knit fabric, you can absolutely top stitch that with a straight stitch. I'll get to your question in just a second, Melissa. So as I was saying, if you have a big swingy skirt or the neckline is nice and open and is never going to have to stretch to get over your head, you can use a top stitch or a straight stitch for your top stitching. Most of the time, that is not going to work. So you have choices. The easiest but most expensive choice is to purchase a cover stitch machine. That will give you 2 parallel lines of top stitching. It will look perfectly straight on the top side, but it'll have a ladder stitch on the bottom side. You can also, some sergers will have a chain stitch. You could use a chain stitch. Chain stitch is stretchy, and so it won't pop stitches in a neckline. Otherwise, you can use a zigzag stitch, which looks a little bit homemade, but I still use it anyway because I'm lazy. You can use a 3-step zigzag stitch, which I think looks a little bit nicer than the regular zigzag, and it has more stretch in it. Or I prefer to use my lightning bolt stitch, and my lightning bolt stitch is set at a length of 2.5 normally. I extend that out to 3.5. I find that it looks straight enough to pass as top stitching without being a huge problem as far as like having enough stretch. So if it says to top stitch, that doesn't necessarily mean to top stitch with a straight stitch. It just means that you need to attach that neckline some way. Let me see. I did top stitch this one, and I did use a lightning bolt stitch. So like I said, that's pretty much my common one. All right, Melissa, your question. And the question reads for anybody who's watching this not live. I find myself often cutting close to the selvage edge. How bad is it if I have a little of the selvage edge in my seam allowance? That question is going to depend. So the selvage edge is not as flexible, but it's still fairly flexible, especially on things like cotton lycra. If you have a little bit of the selvage edge on your pattern piece, but it's not in the seam allowance, then it shouldn't really affect anything, especially if you're going to go through and serger those edges off. It's never going to make a big difference. If it is in your seam allowance, it can cause the fabric to try to pull itself because it's going to keep trying to roll excessively like this. And it's worse, like if you notice this side over here, which is also cut, does not roll like this side over here. So that selvage edge tends to roll more than just a cut edge. So if it's too much into your seam allowance, it's going to cause everything to roll. I usually, when I'm cutting my pattern pieces, I don't go all the way into that edge. I will push it out just a little bit and line myself up close, but you don't want that selvage edge to roll. Now that said, unless somebody is like really going into your laundry and checking all your seams and, you know, is going to grade you in some way, if the garments are just for you, it's not a big deal. And if you're really close on having enough fabric for your project, I would rather squeeze into that selvage edge than have to not finish my project because I don't have enough fabric. So from a professional standpoint, you don't want the selvage edge in your seam allowance. From I'm making t-shirts for my kids, and if they complain they can go naked, then leave that little bit of selvage edge in your seam allowance. Right, so it looks like we don't have any other questions. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Next week, I'm hoping to go live on Wednesday. Our schedule with gymnastics and dance has got moved around again. So I will go live on Wednesday, not Thursday, next week, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Be sure to share so that other people get a chance to see this video and really understand the fact that knitting is the same as knit fabrics and how that applies to your garments. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next week.